Awesome to have Sonos on as usual. Great group of people. A lot of good content to share with you all. First session was awesome. Always appreciate their time and willingness to support our business and your businesses. Beyond that, thanks for joining. Appreciate the time you're taking out of your busy day to join us. I'll turn it over to Matt. Take it away.
All right, Andy, Gary, thank you both so much. Appreciate you. We're excited to talk to you today about some networking when it comes to Sonos. The idea of our conversation here is to lay the foundations of what setting up a solid network with Sonos looks like. You're gonna hear me recommend a lot of things, and you're gonna be like, "Wait, what? I have to do that?" Well, no, that's exactly why I'm saying you're going to hear me recommend a lot of things. One of the cool things about Sonos, and I've been here a little over 8 years now, and one of the first things I realized with Sonos is like, there's just a lot of gray area with our products and our recommendations. It's like, yeah, you should do this, but you could do that if it works. So we're going to give you some recommendations. We're going to give you some guidelines, and note that everything that we are going to be talking about today is it's going to be feedback from our support team. So we were thinking, okay, we should have some technical trainings ready to go, and who better than to tell us what we should train on than you and our support team. So some of the updates, things like that, you'll see came really from the Installed Solutions channel, and uh, we got we got direct feedback from our support team, like, hey, what do you all deal with the most on a day-to-day basis? And if you were trying to teach people the do's and don'ts of networking with Sonos, like, what would you include there? What are the fundamental things you would include? So everything we're talking about today is all of that. And then we'll leave it open. We had just a slew, a gaggle, some would say, of questions at the end. So I might move a little bit faster to try to get some more time for Q&A and at the very end. That is me. My name is Matt. I hail from the Cleveland area. And you may be able to tell by the umbrella. But with me is my friend and colleague JT Pruitt. He will be on the Q&A. He'll be in there chatting through answers, but we'll probably leave it open for Q&A, or we will leave it open for Q&A. We'll discuss that stuff at the end here. We also have Carl Osterloff, which is some random guy I've never met before. Apparently works at Sonos. So
That, just to chime in here, there's a few questions or a few things in the Q&A talking about your audio level being a little bit low. It sounds a little
oh,
low on my end, but it's not too bad. But I would just be aware of that. That's all.
let
Just want to give you a heads
me
up.
see if I can bump it up a little
See, aren't you
bit.
glad I'm here?
Yeah, random Carl. All right, is that any better or no?
About the same.
About the same. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
it's coming across fine for me. So I still see people are saying that they're having problems, but
Yeah, for me it's okay too. It's not
Yeah,
like
it's
super
good
loud.
on my end.
if
So if
anyone's
anyone is
if
having issues,
anyone's having problem, you might want to log off and log back in on Zoom. I've seen sometimes that helps out. So
there you go.
cool. Well, I'll keep trying to talk into my mic, and hopefully y'all can hear me. Okay, so let's lay some groundwork with some Sonos fundamentals, not necessarily networking fundamentals. At Sonos, we are a sound experience company. We take audio very, very, very seriously. In fact, we have multiple multi-million dollar anechoic chambers that can prove to you that we really care the way sound sounds. We even uh, get recommendations and feedback from a team of Oscar and Emmy award winning musicians, composers, producers, all the such, to make sure that our products sound as good as they possibly can. We really want to inspire the world to listen better. We believe that music, movies, your podcasts, your audiobooks, those are the types of things that make your house your home. And we want to make it as simple as possible to access that audio. But the other end of that is brilliant sound. We want to deliver brilliant sound. So no matter what kind of experience you're looking for from our speakers, you'll be able to get that experience, hopefully, right? So whether you're looking for background music and you just kind of want something on playing while you're doing chores, we have products for that. If you are, looking for, a big epic home theater experience, we have products for that. And the backbone of this entire mission, culture, agenda the backbone of all of that is the networking, right? If the networking's not there, if it's not stable, then we can't do what we need to do at Sonos. Now, you can have up to 32 Sonos products all playing the same thing at the same time. And so you can have different songs playing different things or the same thing playing everywhere. So we want to make sure that customers are able to experience that as good as they possibly can. Now, before we jump into the networking specific stuff, let's catch you all up on a couple updates that we launched not too long ago, a few months back. With 13.4, we launched Battery Save Mode. Battery Save Mode is basically the idea behind that. It's with Roam, and what was happening is people were what they thought were shutting off their Roam, and their Roam would turn back on when they would interact with the app. And the reason for that is time to music. That's actually something we track at Sonos. So the idea is, okay, you open up your app, instead of you having to go and, turn on the Roam again, you just open the app and the Roam's there ready to play your music. Well, the problem with that is a potentially perceived bad battery life. And so we launched an update for battery save mode, so that will shut the Roam off completely instead of allowing it to fall asleep. And your customer has control over their Roams and what experience they get when it comes to battery. HD badging, you'll now see when you're listening to high def music through Sonos on the now playing screen, it'll show you a little high def badge. And we also launched DTS 5.1 for home theater fans as well. So that is just another format that we launched. And again, this is a free update. Okay, so we know Sonos takes sound really important, and we really care about audio. We care about that experience. Networking is the backbone of that experience. And frankly, it's one of the main reasons that customers are coming to you to install their system, right? Like, as opposed to going to a big box store, grabbing a player off of the shelf and, taking it home and setting them up themselves. You offer that custom network experience. And, making music and networking really simple can be really complicated. And that's where you all step in to really show the most value to your customers. So great Wi-Fi can make or break the Sonos experience. And frankly, when something goes wrong, customers don't think, oh man, my Wi-Fi must be bad. They more times than not think, oh hey, my Sonos is bad, right? So we want to make sure that we minimize that, and so you're not having to roll your truck back out to your clients' homes. Okay, so we have requirements, we have recommendations here, or requirements. This is kind of line in the sand stuff, right? This is stuff where it's like, hey, I told you a lot of things are malleable. There's a lot of gray area with Sonos. Well, these are some requirements, and they're pretty basic requirements, right? You have to have a Wi-Fi router, unless you are going to hardline everything, which is pretty uncommon. You need to have a Wi-Fi router. You need to have some sort of broadband internet connection, and you need to have cable, DSL, fiber optic, something, internet going into your actual house to be able to use Sonos. We recommend a minimum of 1 megabit per second. Now, that is a minimum. I mean, we're talking like that is minimum to set up Sonos, right? There are things to consider when you're, making sure your customer has the right internet. And this is kind of pre-qualification stuff, right? I'm sure you all can attest to, sometimes you walk into a network and you're like, hey, this is 2021 or 2022. Like, all my customers have 200 megs a second download. And you walk in and it's like, 30 or 50, right? Like, that's probably happened to quite a bit of you out there. So you would just want to make sure that your customer has good download speeds. Now, 1 megabit per second is just for setting up, but you have to consider things like what kind of streaming service are you using? These FLAC services like Deezer Elite, Tidal, they sound great. They use up more bandwidth. You have to consider how many people are streaming at one time. Are you, husband, wife, 3 kids, all streaming, the dog all streaming at the same time? Or, or are they home at different times and people aren't streaming as much, right? So take those things into consideration when you're making sure that your customer has a minimum download speed. And grouping rooms is another thing to consider. How many times is your customer going to want all of their rooms or the majority of their rooms grouped together on their Sonos system? All things to think about when we're talking minimum download speeds from Sonos and our recommendations. Now, things that aren't recommended, satellite internet. Just because of the, normally satellite internet is in places that don't have high-speed internet, and that satellite internet connection can be spotty at best. So that can leave a sour taste in customers' mouths. Also, broadband, cellular internet, right? These 5G, 4G, LTE network hotspots. Again, not recommended because you can use it. It's just, things to consider here are data usage. Your customer, if they have a data cap, they this is going to start gobbling up their data depending on what streaming service they're using. Again, how many players are grouped and what's being streamed and whatnot, right? Not to mention that if your customer has unlimited, well, what if their cell company throttles them after a certain amount of data usage, and now the first 3 weeks of the month they have a great experience, and that last week it's just it really slows down, cuts out, that sort of thing, right? So we just don't recommend it. We recommend staying away from it. Not supported, routers without internet. Also, guest Wi-Fi networks, shared networks, anything that requires an enterprise WPA2 authentication. Really, we're talking enterprise networks, business networks, colleges. We're talking hotels. It's really, really difficult to get Sonos set up in those types of places. Now, there's two different ways to set up Sonos. We have standard setup or station mode, which is really, think of it as just like wireless. It's just wireless. It's a wireless setup, right? So the pros, this is the easiest way to install Sonos. No wires or cords, no extra accessories. It just works on the home's Wi-Fi. But the cons could also be it is reliant on your customer's Wi-Fi signal, right? It's reliant on the integrity of that connection. So if they have dead zones, if they have a weak signal, if they're not having a good experience from a network standpoint overall, that is going to very quickly cause your Sonos to start acting up. Now, worth noting, when you are set up on station mode, there is, again, that 32 player limit. When you hardline a player and start SonosNet, which we'll talk about here next, it's worth noting that does count as a player. So a boost counts as one of those devices. So if you're running SonosNet with a boost, you have 31 other Sonos products that you can put on your network. And worth noting, when a player is set up in Wi-Fi, that the Ethernet cables are by default turned off, and data's transmission is turned off on those players. Now, the reading of this slide too really shouldn't say 32 devices on a network. It should say 32 devices on a household. You can technically have more than 32 players on a network. It's just that those 32 players, like let's say JT in his house has 37 players in his house. If he has to cap a household off at 32, and then 33 through 37 is an entirely separate household. So those rooms can't be grouped. There's a different account. It's almost like if you're setting it up in a client's home and their vacation home. It just so happens to be on one network. So the wording really should be 32 players on a single household. Yeah, keep that in mind. And the reason we cap it at 32 is because that's the most we're comfortable with saying, hey, we can have this many speakers all playing the same thing at the exact same time. And you are going to get less than a millisecond of latency, which isn't even detectable to the human ear. After that, things start to get really kind of dicey, and we just want to guarantee a rock solid experience. The other way to set up Sonos is a wired setup or SonosNet. Now, what I should say is a wired setup starts SonosNet. SonosNet is our proprietary mesh network that all of our speakers receive and repeat throughout the home, so that you get a rock solid wireless performance when listening to music and grouping Sonos throughout the home. I should note that our mesh network is not the mesh. We're not saying we are, the best mesh networkers out there. Our products are not made to mesh network. They just make mesh networks. So, we're not saying we're as good as some of these newer mesh networks out there. The Arachnises, the Ubiquities, the different mesh networking brands you can get out there. Those are intense. Ours is simply designed for Sonos, and it's designed for music. And it's just designed for our product. So you're not going to be able to connect your customer's laptop or Xbox to the Sonos mesh network. But yeah, any player, by the way, can start a Sonos mesh network. So most of the times it's a boost, because boost just plugs into the router, and most players aren't close to the router. Or the first player isn't close to the router. So most of the times it's a boost, but if you plug any Sonos product into the router, that then will start SonosNet as you're setting it up. Okay, so things to consider and reasons you may want SonosNet is interference, right? Different types of material can cause more or less havoc on your network. And it's worth considering when going into a home. Are you going into a 100-year-old house? Well, the material built that the house is made out of is a lot denser probably than a house made within the last few years. So, you know, a lot of plaster, a lot of concrete. My house was built in the 70s, and I have this stucco on the front of my house that just wreaks havoc on my network, and so I've had to spend a lot of time getting that situated. Yeah, so you know, things to consider when you're setting up Sonos is what kind of materials is the home made out of that could cause issues. When it comes to using a mesh network, because honestly, that's probably going to be your first thought. Well, I'm having network issues. Let me grab a mesh network system, and that should take care of it. We want to make sure that that is your go-to. We highly discourage using any form of range extenders. No bueno on the range extenders. We do not recommend doing it. A lot of times those are just grabbing the weak signal they're already, that's already there and extending that further, and that's really not going to do you much good. Only true mesh networking with a single SSID and password when it comes to any sort of like quote unquote range extending. Now, if you do interference, or if you do run into interference, one of the first things we recommend. I have one thing that we'll talk about a little bit before this, but one of the first things we recommend doing for troubleshooting is placing the player in a different space. Let's say you could place it on the other corner of the room. You can even place it in the other room altogether and see if it connects in that other space. Move it closer to the router. If it connects, then you're probably having some sort of interference issue, or the network is not reaching that spot that you're trying to set up a player. Once you've determined that, then you can determine the solution and put the player where the customer, of course, initially wanted it. Now, we do recommend having some sort of Wi-Fi analyzer available. I know that there are a lot of options that are available out there to you, and so we highly recommend having some sort of Wi-Fi analyzer to check this type of stuff out for your customer. It's just, again, one of those things that will really set you apart from some of those other customers. Now, we recommend using the 20 megahertz frequency on the router as opposed to the 40 megahertz. Of course, there can be, faster Wi-Fi speeds and overall more throughput from the 40 megahertz frequency. However, 20 megahertz, there's less channel interference, and so we'll want to stick to the 20 megahertz bandwidth there on your router. Now, one of the things you can do when you are using SonosNet, again, SonosNet is only here if you plug a player into the router and start SonosNet, is that you can channel select. So on the 2.4 gigahertz frequency, channels 1, 6, and 11 are the non-overlapping channels. So set your router. Your router's on your router's 2.4, and you're setting your channels. So we recommend you put, say, the router on channel 1 and then Sonos on channel 6 or channel 11. You can find this in the advanced options. You'll see the network. It'll say Sonos. It'll say SonosNet, and you just select that, and then you can change the channel from there. Change the channel on the router. You'll probably have to reboot, you may have to reboot your router, and then those channels will be changed. Now, a huge thing here, and this is, you'd be surprised how many installers we talk to that forget this: turn off auto channel select when you're doing this. This is especially important to remember if you're working with a client who's using a router or modem from their ISP. Auto channel select is left on. Your customer runs into the same problem and then within the next 72 hours probably, and you're rolling your truck back out there because of something that could have been avoided just by remembering to turn off auto channel select. If there are multiple APs in the home, we recommend setting all. I already mentioned that, and then we also recommend making sure that all of the APs are on the same channel as well. So you don't want your main router on channel 1 and then your APs that are set up throughout the house on channel 6 or channel 11. You want all of those APs on the same channel, so keep that in mind as well. A few things to consider: AP client wireless isolation. When you're trying to set up a network that blocks peer-to-peer sharing, that's where Sonos runs into problems, because we need to be able to peer-to-peer share not only for audio transfer but also for metadata as well. So peer-to-peer sharing needs to be turned on, and so if it's not, we can't do what we need to do, which is, by the way, why it's rare you see us in hotels. It's rare you see us in anywhere where there's enterprise accounts, colleges. It's rare you see us in college dorm rooms or anything like that, because those networks by default turn off peer-to-peer communication. I'm not saying it's impossible to install us in those places. I'm just saying it's difficult, and it can be a task. So keep that in mind. Anything that's going to stop peer-to-peer sharing with Sonos, usually not a good idea. Wideband Wi-Fi. If you use wideband Wi-Fi, that's cool in some scenarios. If you're using a single AP network, just your typical router, maybe it's a really beefy router and it gives you really good coverage, that might be a place where it makes sense to use wideband Wi-Fi to get that overall, better throughput and faster speeds. That is cool with us. Our recommendation comes when using SonosNet. If you plug Sonos into the router and create SonosNet, we recommend not using wideband Wi-Fi, because that can cause adjacent channel interference. So if you're not using SonosNet, wideband Wi-Fi might be a good idea. If you are using SonosNet, we recommend staying away from wideband Wi-Fi. If you wire more than one Sonos component in a boost setup, it is recommended to use an unmanaged switch. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit more later, because I already hear you all saying, wait, what? What? Sonos recommends an unmanaged switch? We will talk about that, my friends. Don't worry. But recommended distances when using Sonos wirelessly. Up to 50 feet between components. That's our theoretical maximum. It's important, again, to consider interference and things that might be causing interference in the home that could block Sonos. That maximum might not be 50 feet. Now, one thing worth noting is you can use Boost as a quote-unquote wireless daisy chain, or like a wireless mesh repeater, right? Think of a Sonos Net AP, right? So, theoretically, you could have, or analogically, you can have, I think that's the word. You can have, let's say you have speakers set up in room A, and across the hall on the other side of the room, you have speaker B over here, right? And speaker B is not getting a great connection. Well, if you put a Boost in the middle of those two players, Boost can act as a Sonos Net repeater to, speaker B to potentially to help with your Sonos Net. So if you need to put players more than 50 feet apart, that is a potential solution. But we really recommend trying to stay within that at tops 50 feet, between players recommendation. Now, here is the first step. I mentioned earlier that I have one step of troubleshooting for networking, and it is the one step before moving players and trying to connect closer to the router. And it is that bottom point there. Try to keep your first wired component at least 3 feet away from the router. You'd be surprised how many people don't think about that. And honestly, it is kind of, it flies under the radar. Think about it. You have your router, which is making a network, and then you also have your Sonos wired component, which is making another network, the Sonos Net. And now you have these two things really close to each other, and that could be causing interference. So this to me is step absolute one. If you run into interference, try moving the Boost or the plugged in Sonos player a little bit further away from the router to see if that helps. And if it does, of course, that's the issue. If not, then move to trying to set players up in different rooms in different corners of the home, and then pulling out that Wi-Fi analyzer to check the integrity of the network. Also, keeping in mind that anything that's RF can potentially wreak havoc on your system. So consider that as well when you're putting players throughout the house. Where are microwaves at? Where wireless phones going to be? Where are there baby monitors, other speaker systems, or other types of remotes, that sort of thing. All of that stuff is worth considering when you are setting up a network with Sonos. Okay, next let's talk about Spanning Tree Protocol. Spanning Tree Protocol, or STP, it basically allows for loop prevention and link redundancy in your network design. It basically scans the topology of your network, and it wants to make sure that everything's running as smoothly as it possibly can. Our version of STP, it just does its thing. It works on its own. There's really nothing you need to or really can do to control our STP. But there is something you can do to potentially mess it up. And so that's what we want to make sure to talk about here in a little bit. Basically, spanning tree protocol sends out every 2 seconds these BPDUs that scan the integrity of the network. It scans the topology of the network, and it says, okay, here are the paths that are redundant, and it cancels those paths, right? So instead of you having this chance for potential loops and redundant data being transferred, it cuts off the ones you don't need. And this is huge because if this isn't implemented properly, this won't just shut down your Sonos potentially. This could potentially shut down the entire network. It can cause a network storm of your entire network, and that, of course, is a bad thing. So, what is the one thing that can happen that you have control over that can cause STP to not be set up properly? I think some of you might know where I'm going with this. Improperly setting up a managed switch, which is why we recommend an unmanaged switch if you're going to use a switch. Managed switches are great. And look, I know a lot of you are using managed switches, which is why I have this handy dandy chart of the ports that need to be, the settings that need to be configured, the ports that need to be available. Make sure that these are the settings you're using when setting up a managed switch, and you shouldn't have a problem, right? Now, worth noting, at the bottom left, you'll see a reference number. If you go to our support site, sonos.com/support, you can type in that reference number, and that number will take you right to this particular information. So screen grab this, take a picture with your phone, jot that reference number down, whatever you got to do. I'll give you a couple minutes while I sip some coffee here. But these are the settings that we recommend instead of going through and talking about all of them. Let's leave them here. These are the settings we recommend when you are using a managed switch.
Yeah, guys, we'll have this on the slide deck that I send you on Friday morning too. Right, Matt? Cool. Thanks.
Indeed. All right, that should have been enough time to make sure you have that information. I'm happy to talk about this a little bit more if need be in our Q&A session at the end here. And keep in mind that STP is not utilized at all when you're not wired Sonos. Like if you're just running off of a mesh network and you don't have anything, or just a standard single AP network, and you're not plugged into the router using Sonos Net, STP on our end is not implemented at all. It only implements once Sonos Net starts. So if you're we recommend an unmanaged switch unless you need to sell a managed switch. If you need to use a managed switch, then use those settings we just recommended to make sure it's configured properly. I'll also leave this up for a second or two. This, again, a reference number. These are ports that we recommend having open for any sort of port forwarding. So, you can have this in your back pocket if you need to specifically open up anything or change anything there. Then you have the settings that you need, and this will make sure that your network is running as efficiently as possible. So I'll wait another 5 seconds to give you time to screenshot or take a picture of that. Okay, should have been enough time there. All right, so rack, setting up a rack system. So here's the thing: is we recommend individual wires from each player back to an unmanaged switch. That is like, if you're asking me, hey Newman, what should I do when wiring Sonos? What is Sonos's recommendation? That is it. I'm not telling you have to do this every single time. I'm not telling you there aren't exceptions to this rule. I'm just saying, in the perfect world where the stars align, this is our recommendation. So let's say you have 10 amps. We recommend a hard line, an Ethernet from each amp individually from itself back to an unmanaged switch, and one wire from the unmanaged switch to the router or modem. Right? So that's our recommendation. Each player gets its own wire. Now, daisy chaining, that is a thing. That is, and that's fine. We understand that helps and that makes your lives a lot easier in some scenarios, and so we get it. Our support team recommends no more than 7 bridges. So 1 player and then 7 bridges spanned off of that. Now, here's the thing. We recommend 3 or less. So it's like technically classic STP had a recommendation of 7 bridges. We recommend trying to keep it 3 or less. Really here's the main thing. Try to keep daisy chaining as low as possible. The reason for that is you could run into issues, and issues, it's like, it's very convenient, and when it works, it works. But if you run into an issue or a problem, that can make problems a lot worse. Let's say, Lord forbid, the first amp in that chain of 10, let's say you have seven amps all bridged together, 8 amps technically, and the first one, the networking card goes bad randomly, or something happens, the power goes out on that amp. Well, your customer's having a dinner party. Instead of them having 7 players that didn't work, or that work, and just one of them's down, now all of their amps are down in all of those separate rooms. It's like, yeah, I might not be so mad if like one of my speakers is down. I might be pretty upset if like half my network's down, right? Half of my Sonos is down. So keep that in mind. Daisy chaining, it can be done. This is our recommendation, but just try to keep daisy chaining as low as possible. And just to make sure we're on the same page, when daisy chaining, what I mean is having, amp 1 plugged into the router, and then from the second Ethernet port, having an Ethernet ran from that to the next amplifier under it, and so on and so forth. So you can do it. Technically, limitation is 7, but just try to keep it as low as you possibly can. And then if you want to add a boost, we would recommend just adding a boost up front with your customer and just having that conversation with them. Add a boost, and boost plugs into that switch. And by the way, I would recommend setting up boost. That will then become your root bridge, which is kind of the quarterback of your spanning tree protocol. So have boost set up, and set up boost. You can set it up on the rack or set it up outside of the rack if that rack has a door, or you have it in a little closet. If you can try to give it a little bit of room to breathe, that's ideal. And remember to try to keep it 3 feet away from the router if you can as well. Now, the nice thing about this is you have everything in the rack that's squared away, and that's all just kind of doing its thing. And then the nice thing is, if your customer wants you to add a Sonos 1 in the bathroom, a Sonos 5 in the bedroom, then you can just plug it in, set it up wirelessly from there, and you're good to go. That's the benefit of having just the boost set up and ready to go for future installs. Disabling Wi-Fi. Now, our guidance on disabling Wi-Fi, it doesn't always make sense to turn Wi-Fi off when you're hardlining a player. Let's talk about that. So first, let's talk about when it does make sense. When you have a lot of players close to each other, the nice thing about being able to disable Wi-Fi, which, by the way, this was a feature requested by your channel. When it comes to disabling Wi-Fi, it's nice. It relieves, well, for starters, there's less interference. It relieves the network, so you have a more stable network, and that makes sense. Especially any of you vets who have been around for a while, you remember the Connect amps. The Connect amps where didn't have this option. We didn't have the software made then, so you have all of these amps, Connect amps in a rack, 15 Connect amps, and they're all really close to each other. They're all making a mesh network by default, but they don't need to be because they're wired. And so that could cause a lot of interference potentially. So turning the Wi-Fi off is nice in that scenario, but there are a couple scenarios where it makes sense to leave the Wi-Fi on. One of those ways, one of those times it makes sense, is if you are going to add a wireless player later. So remember how I just mentioned setting a boost off to the side or setting a boost up already on the system and just having that ready to go if your customer wants to add wireless players later? Well, let's use our analogy of 10 amps in a rack. Well, what you can do is have that first amp set up, leave the Wi-Fi on. Remember, you can plug in any Sonos component to start SonosNet. So leave that amp on, the Wi-Fi on it, and then on your other 9 amps in the rack, turn all of those turn the Wi-Fi off on all of those because they are already hardlined. They don't need wireless. But that amp will then be broadcasting a wireless signal that when you do want to set up other Sonos throughout the home, they'll be on SonosNet and they'll be running and doing their thing there. So yeah, keep that in mind. The other scenario where it makes sense to leave Wi-Fi on is in a home theater setup. Where the home theater device needs to communicate with the wireless players. Let's say let's say you have an ARC hardline, and the sub and the surrounds are on Wi-Fi, and you turn the ARC's Wi-Fi off. Well, how in the world is Arc going to talk to the sub and the surrounds? By the way, that product is one doing all the crossover. It's controlling the home theater system, so it's not going to be able to talk to those wireless players, right? So if you're in home theater, it might make sense to just leave Wi-Fi turned on, unless you have literally everything hardlined. So under advanced settings, you can disable your Wi-Fi on each and every individual room if you would like. All right, next topic. This is a brief one, but a big one. We get a ton of questions on it, and we really just wanted to break it down as easy as we possibly can. And it starts with, getting some vocab down. First, there's home theater coordinator. Home theater coordinator, whatever product is plugged into the TV, that's what's controlling all the crossover. And then you have your bonded players, whatever is bonded to the home theater coordinator. So our guidance is this. Hardline everything. Don't hardwire anything. Let it all just work on Wi-Fi. Or only hardline the fronts. Only hardwire the fronts. What am I basically recommending you don't do here? I'm recommending you don't only hardwire the bonded players. Right? So hardwire everything, don't hardwire anything, or only hardwire the home theater coordinator. Because the home theater coordinator, again, is what's controlling all of the crossover, right? So what happens if your surround or your sub is hardlined into the network and it's receiving information before the home theater coordinator is able to process that and send it to the player? Dropouts, latency, yeah, bunch of bad stuff. So we highly recommend staying away from only hardwiring bonded players in a home theater configuration. Now, sub always bonds over 5 gigahertz when it comes to bonding to the home theater coordinator. And by the way, this is true for surrounds as well. Now, that's nice because interference is less likely on the 5 gigahertz frequency, but it also drops the range from about 50 feet to about 30 feet. So keep that in mind when you're setting up Sonos and it's all wireless. You want to make sure that you keep those players. Within about 50 feet or so if you're running them on wireless. If you're running them wirelessly, this is also important because for like Connect Amp retrofits. You had maybe your customer had Connect Amp in a rack on the other side of the house. Because it was hardline, that was cool, but for some reason now you don't want to, just want to clean things up a little bit. You're thinking about not hardwiring that amp. Well, think again. That amp is going to need to be roughly 30 feet or so from the player itself. So in that scenario, you would want to just hardwire the new amp and be on your merry way. So really, you keep in mind if you're running home theater wirelessly, there's about a 30 feet or so maximum between players. And so consider that when doing those installs. Okay, rounding third and headed home, let's talk about setting up Sonos. There's 3 different ways to set up Sonos. Near field communication, audio modulation, which is that fun little chime sound, and of course a manual input, which I'm sure is all of your favorite ways to set up Sonos. So for starters, NFC is the most simple way. You tap your phone to the player. The idea of secure setup, by the way, is security. So there's an 8-digit PIN that needs to be passed from the player to the app that you're using to try to set it up. Now, you can't live in a different apartment or in a different townhouse and use near field communication or hear that chime, right? Which is why we use these methods. So that 8-digit PIN gets sent over NFC. If that fails, you won't even know it because we'll kick you right over from NFC authentication to that audio modulation, i.e. the chime sound. That chime sound, the 8-digit PIN is built into that chime sound. Your phone will hear that chime sound and the app will recognize that 8-digit PIN and say, okay, cool. This is the 8-digit PIN on the back of the player. This is the player they're trying to set up. Now, the last way to set up Sonos is by manually entering in that PIN. This is especially important with port and amp, seeing as they can't make a chime sound, right? So keep that in mind before you do the installation, before you put it in the rack. We talked to a lot of installers. A lot of you are already using label makers to label the room that the amp is or port is associated with. Make a label for the PIN as well. So that way You don't have to go back, pull it out of the rack, or look behind it, figure it all out, move cables and stuff to see the pin. We recommend just putting the pin on the front of it with a label. But we hear you. We probably have already people typing up in the chat, hey, why don't you make the print bigger? Why don't you make it easier to see? We hear you. We hear that feedback. We get it. It is tough to see, but those are some solutions for you. But just make sure you think about that before you put them in the rack, that you will need that 8-digit pin to install Sonos. I personally got annoyed by this. I have my home theater is an Arc with a sub, and I have some in-ceiling speakers powered by an amp, and my amp is mounted on my wall right above the outlet beside my couch. And I was still beta testing this, and my amp was acting funny because of an update, and so my amp didn't update, so I had to update it, and then it wanted me to enter the pin, and I'm like, are you freaking serious? So I had to pull it up, then I had to type the pin in, then I put it back on like a goober, because it was beta software, so my stuff is just, stuff happens when you're on beta programs. It just doesn't work the way it should. And so I had to pull it off the wall 2 times, 3 times before finally I was like, all right, I'm not putting this back on the wall until I know this is set up. And then finally, the 4th time, it's set up properly and everything was kosher. But, trust me, I get it. If there's anybody who feels some empathy for you, it's yours truly. Changing Wi-Fi. When it comes to changing Wi-Fi, we made this simpler as well. Before, you used to have to either factory reset everything and start over from scratch, or you used to have to hardline the player from the old home. You used to have to hardline that into the new router for that network information to get associated. Well, now you can open up the Sonos app and go into the settings and hit update network to update your router and your network. Go to system, go to network, updates router and network. Alternatively, if you open up your app and it can't connect to anything, it'll say, let's fix this or learn more. And you click that, and we'll walk you through changing the credentials, the SSID, and the password for Sonos in your Wi-Fi to regain communication. So that was an update. Another update that you all helped us with. Customers move, customers upgrade their equipment, and maybe they want new SSIDs or whatever, and this makes it even easier to do that. All right, my friends, that is everything that we have for you network related. Wanted to leave some time for Q&A, so would love to invite Andy, Gary, JT, and Carl if he's still here. I don't know if he jumped off or, but would love to invite you all back into the conversation. We'll go ahead and get these squared away, and then Andy, Gary, if you all have anything to, of course, you're hosting, so I'm sure you already know this, but if we're saying something and you're just like, hey, I got something to add here. Don't hesitate to cut us off and throw whatever insight you bring here. We would not be offended.
I just want to add, because it came up on the last webinar as well, and I answered a question in the Q&A about some specific or Arachnus specific questions. Just for the broader audience, we are working with and will continue to work with the Sonos product team. And what we're trying to accomplish is to create this type of training specific to Arachnus products, and maybe even a loadable profile to make life a little bit easier for you all. So in progress, no time frame as of right now. But it is something that we've identified together with Sonos that, hey, this would be a great value to the CI channel and to our respective our mutual dealers. So keep your eyes open for something like that down the road.
Yeah, guys, I would suggest just for the Q&A here, JT, have you kind of gone through there, or did you leave ones that you wanted to address live? Because there's a number of them. Andy, if you said you knocked off a couple of the Arachnus kind of topics, then let's get through this. Let's start hammering them out. What do you say?
Cool.
Yeah, JT, I don't know that very.
I was having some AirPod issues. So I was like, why can I not hear anything? So I just turned off my Bluetooth, and we're not going to roll with any headphones right now. So there's that. I'll go ahead and start. I missed the last 30 seconds of what you guys were talking about because I had no sound. But let's, Matt, are we ready to jump into Q&A?
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and start with this question from John. Speaking of feature requests, could you please add functionality back to the desktop app for setting up new equipment? So I'll start with that. So the reason that we actually took it away is even in the CI channel, it was less than 2% used. So in general, the desktop app gets used just for music playback very minimally, and it was even less for setup. Second reason why with products today, especially running off of a network, everything needs to be secure. So with our new secure setup process, when you're transferring data like Wi-Fi credentials, music service credentials, and in some cases credit card info, um, from the computer to a player is not it's not very secure. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we went from phone. So when you do a setup today, you're actually directly connecting your phone to that player. It's not going to a cloud or anything like that. It's physically connecting to that player. In terms of NFC, we hear you. NFC has been a challenge because there's so many different NFC tags out in the wild from players to phone manufacturers. Um, so while today there isn't a way to theoretically skip NFC, it does take 2 or 3 tries before it will move on to the next step, which is the inaudible chirp that you all hear. That does include that PIN code. Stay tuned on that. I can't give a whole lot away, but we hear you. We understand. We get it. It's all a learning process. Anything to add, Newman, on that?
No, nothing to add.
I'll take this one because it kind of goes with the pin question or setup as well. So include a sticker in the box for amp and port like Snap does. It's a great option. So this has been a work in progress for over a year. We have changed several times the font for the pin and the for amp and port. So however, the problem is what happens hypothetically if a customer moves, takes their product with them, and loses that PIN code? They will no longer be able to set up that product at their next house. That's why it's physically etched on the product itself, because that PIN is unique to that product, and we cannot reset it. And from a Sonos perspective, we can't even see what the PIN is. So once we put it on the product, it's on the product for forever. We don't want to, hypothetically, customer buys an amp today and then they move in 2 years and they take that amp with them and they try to reset it up. They no longer have that pin and now it's useless. So we're coming up with different ways to utilize to make things a little bit easier. This change happened. It's not going to go back to what it was before. It's only going to get better. So we've made some changes to the font of the pin for amp and port. And we're continuing to figure out better ways of utilizing it. So just stay tuned.
Cool. All right. So a couple of questions. You mean for clarification, someone asked, you mean keep it away from the first WAP, not the router? I mean, yeah, I guess yes. I presumed that. Apologies there. I should have been more specific. Yes, I mean, if you want to keep it away from whatever is starting your wireless network at least 3 feet. If you're, it doesn't have to be 3 feet away from just, a standard, potential like router that doesn't have Wi-Fi. There's a VPN question that I can't answer specifically, but if anybody can, I feel like that's...
I can't. I already looked at it.
Okay, I'm like right there on it, but I'm just like, The question is, why are VPNs not supported? Seems only one-hop networks are okay. And I'm like this close to having an answer for it, but VPNs just obviously, these virtual tunnels implement security protocols. I can't be specific, but it's something to do with the way VPNs set up security protocols between networks, and it can mess with our settings. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you than that. But feel free to email us at webinar-support@sonos.com. And I didn't mention that, by the way. If we can't get you a specific answer to your question, we're happy to get those questions answered in a follow-up email.
Newman, Nick has 2 questions. I'll let me and you both can kind of handle this one, the first one, and then I'll answer the second one. In home theater mode with ARC, amp, and sub, most of our installs involve amp being in a rack in the basement. since the ARC is obviously not going to connect wirelessly since it's too far away, we have to hardwire the amp and hardwire the sub. Correct. This sometimes causes STP issues. How do you recommend wiring in this situation? We have to use managed switches because we run VLANs.
Okay. Do you want me to start, JT, or do you want?
Yeah, you start, and then I'll take the
Okay.
second part of the question.
Basically, the wiring. So kind of what happens when you wire Sonos is the first player that gets wired ends up being the root bridge. Now, any player can be the root bridge, really. The reason it's normally the first player that gets wired is the root bridge is just the player that is getting the information first. Sonos just says, hey, you're the easiest way to send this data, so you are now the root bridge. What can happen, though, is if a player that is in a space where there might be some sort of interference or you know, there might be something causing the network to not broad, you know, interference, drop out, weak spot, that sort of thing. What can happen is if you wire a certain player and you wire multiple players, that can confuse the system into declaring which one is the root bridge. So what we would recommend doing is setting up one, just letting that player, configuring that player completely, maybe play some tunes, maybe play a little bit of music through it first just to make sure it's established on the network, and then start running and then start hardwiring the rest of your players. Because once a root bridge is established, the only way to really get rid of a root bridge or change a root bridge is to pull the plug on it. And then the Sonos system will try to find another root bridge. Sometimes that can cause issues, and so we would recommend unplugging everything. If there's a specific player that you want to be the root bridge, ideally the player that is the root bridge is centrally located in the house. But then unplug all of the other players, establish that player is the root bridge, and then start hardwiring the other players to it.
Yep. Yeah. And then the second part of his question, will you be able to do remote support for clients someday? Possibly, maybe. Can't really disclose a lot of information. Obviously, we know it's something that in this channel is such a big deal. So can't give you any definitive answer, but stay tuned. This next question, Newman, I'll go ahead and take as well. It's around product. So Charlie asked, product fulfillment on orders, direct from Sonos for ARCs from an order from October stated, started at 12 weeks and is now still unfulfilled. What types of challenges are being faced, and when can we expect these to be overcome? So I'll speak for really everybody in the tech industry in terms of challenges. It's literally anything and everything that you can think of, from component shortages to shipping problems, to not enough people at the ports to unload products. The list goes on and on and on. When can we expect them? I don't want to give you a date because that date probably would change if I did. Just know from us, we are doing everything that we can as fast as we can. If we could snap our fingers, we would do so. If you noticed, before it was ARCs, it was AMP, and we were really backlogged in AMP. Well, we caught up on AMP. We've done a really good job of getting where we need to be with AMP. Unfortunately, other products have different parts, so those parts start to come pretty scarce. We're working as hard as we can. The best thing I can tell you is stay if you're direct from Sonos. If you're direct, stay in touch with your account manager. I know Carl was on this call just a little bit ago, and he dropped off. These guys are sending out inventory updates weekly to let you guys know where we are. We're being very transparent of it. We're not trying to hide that it's a problem. Of course it's a problem, but it's not just Sonos. It's everything from washers and dryers to Sonos to mattresses. And the guys at Snap probably also have some of those as well.
Yeah, I just to speak from a kind of broader perspective beyond just Sonos product, because it is a broader topic. Number one, I'm going to have a shameless plug for a webinar we did back toward in Q4 of last year, where we actually had our some executives and some leaders from our supply chain and sourcing organizations as on a roundtable setting talking about the topic. It is all still valid information right now. Every manufacturer, Snap, Sonos, everybody is dealing with a lot of issues right now. Really started with COVID. Factories there was fires in major source chip manufacturing. There are shortages in silica. There are then the shipping concerns with all the boats and ports. And then if they get to ports, the trucks, I mean, like it is just a cascading domino effect. It's not an excuse. It's the reality of the world we're living in right now. No one is going to give you a concrete date as to when it's going to get better. There have been some improvements recently, and I want to point out to everybody on the call, Sonos is one of those improvements. Again, I have a broad view of over 100 vendors, right, or 100 plus vendors, and Sonos as of Q4 and coming into this year has done a very good job. Still not there, and I'm sure they'd like to be in a lot better place. But compared to a lot of people, they've actually upped their supply of product to the custom integration channel. So I really appreciate that from them. And I know Alberto's listening, so I'll call him out and thank him for his help. But
don't thank him for anything.
Don't thank him. Okay. but yeah, I mean, again, I would encourage you, if you have any questions on what's broader impacts of what is going on with supply chain and all that, go back and check out that webinar.
Awesome. That's really cool. You guys did that, having industry leaders sitting down and talking about that. That's pretty sweet. Okay, a couple questions that I wanted to make sure to cover, just because it particularly it's just clarification on some stuff that we had talked about. So we had a question here. What exactly does enable disable Wi-Fi actually do? Does it mean that a particular unit will or will not create SonosNet? Does it have anything to do with the home's actual Wi-Fi? So just to make sure we're all on the same page here, we're talking disable Wi-Fi in the sense of Sonos. So yeah, whenever you plug in and whenever you hardline a piece of Sonos, it is going to create a network like that. It's just the way it's designed. It gets plugged in. It's going to create a network so that I could be a part of that mesh network. Disabling Wi-Fi just turns the Wi-Fi off on that particular player, so that particular player is no longer broadcasting and looking to receive a wireless network from the other Sonos players, the other Sonos, your Sonos net. So yeah, it sounds like you have a pretty good grasp on it, but I'm glad you asked. So when we're talking disable Wi-Fi from a Sonos perspective, we're talking just disabling Wi-Fi from Sonos. The other question I wanted to make sure to address, if we want to use standard setup in order to alleviate network switch issues, can I still place multiple amps in the same rack? Of course, yeah, you can totally. Just be aware of interference. If interference starts happening and the players start dropping off, or music starts skipping out, or the app starts acting funny, that's one of the first places you kind of know, like, all right, maybe the amps are a little bit too close, or maybe they're that's causing interference. Let me kind of rework this. But yeah, of course you can still set up a bunch of wireless amps on a rack. We just usually they're hardwired. You usually have the router set up in the rack and everything too, which is why we spent so much time on the guidance there. But yeah,
Newman, kind of going off of that, talking about apps or the app kind of freaking out and song skipping, we'll go ahead and just touch on this question from Will. Is the error encoding song that skips through songs on a Sonos on a playlist, I can't talk either, typically a network issue or a music service issue? Honestly, it could be a little bit of both depending on the day. I'll be completely blunt. There are some times where the music services, it's going to be on their end, and it could be a number of things. It could be the music service having an issue itself, or there could be multiple people trying to use that one single music service, right? So for example, Spotify, if you just pay for the regular Spotify plan, it's 1-to-1, right? So one person can listen at a time. That chance is very unlikely, but it does happen. On the flip side, most of the time when you get it skipping through tracks and it's saying error encoding, something along those lines, then it's probably an underlying network issue somewhere. The best advice I could give, if you ever have that issue, don't wait to ask the customer to grab a diag. We need that diag as soon as that happens. You can do two things. You can call support, or you can utilize the chat bot on Sonos.com. Using that diag will save you a ton of time in troubleshooting. But it has to be, right when that problem happens. If you take it 6 or 7 hours later, or if you unplug the product and then take a diag, we can't see anything.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Okay, so we want to be respectful of all of your time. Last time we went far over. I didn't even realize it, honestly. Sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions. There are so many of them. We have our email up here. that email that you send there goes to me, it goes to JT, it goes to a couple of our other colleagues, and we can get an answer for you on the questions that you might have. So again, sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions. Gary, we turn it over to you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I was just reading through some of them too, and Philip, I know your URC question, your light remote control recommends all devices with the MAC address to be hardwired, MAC reservation or static IP assignments. Any concerns likely for this? It's funny, Philip, I did get your email, and he was looking from the perspective, he was on the morning session, and just kind of clarifying to himself, hey, stay away from X, Y, and Z. He's implementing new systems, right? And utilizing our discussion today on what to stay away from, or not necessarily to stay away from. He's just not encountering some of those issues. So staying off certain switches and so forth. And so anyway, Phil, hit me back. I've got these guys in tow to get all your questions answered. I know it's at the top of the hour and this can go on and on and on. JT, you were with me, I think, on one of those roundtables.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to address as the product continues to infiltrate into it. I mean, it's funny, it's like fulfillment in a sense. It's not just about the fulfillment, but think about how many new partners we continually engage with who are now new partners to you. And that's one of the ads here. And so we're going to have to continue to dive into not only this module, but feature sets of some of the new things coming out, and having a forum for some of these guys to ask the questions, because we, in a sense, this forum right here, they are direct with us and we are their support unit. So not to just kind of cut it off there with everybody else, but I think the best thing to do is, you're going to get the emails from me. You guys are communicating with me on an ongoing basis, JT and Matt. Let's continue this conversation over the next couple of days. I know I got Carl in tow as well, like I said. I'm going to package all this together. Matt, send me this deck. Hey, did you enhance this deck, or was this the same deck? Were we good with what was not in the very first one? Because they'll see the recording of the very first one and be looking maybe for a page or two from that initial deck.
Yeah, no, this is the same deck.
Okay, great. Let's utilize this deck. Everybody's going to get this on Friday morning with the links to the archived audio and video discussion here, as well as some of the other links. I think I'm going to pull out that, or not pull out, but I'll take a picture of the of a couple of the slides here and for further enhancement on my email, just for a follow-up, so you can open it up, boom, kind of look at that, and we'll go from there. Guys, thank you so much. It just tells me that we're going to be back on this in 6-8 weeks. Okay, guys, I'm going to have you back on.
Gary, what we might do in 6 to 8 weeks, instead of running through a full deck, maybe we just do a condensed deck and then do a half-hour Q&A session.
Yeah, maybe so. Lean more heavily on the specifics here.
Yep,
I would agree. And so JT and Matt, I'm going to have you first. I'm going to book it with you and leave those other guys out of it. Let's just cut to the chase and get this done, because that's what this forum's all about. I mean, we've had probably 150 people on today, actually more, almost 200 people on today.
Almost 200.
So, yeah, great job, guys. So in conclusion, guys, thank you so much. Off next week. We're going to be back the next week with our partner rewards program. I want you all to be in attendance, and there's so much to offer. I want you guys to be very clear about how that program is going to be working for you going forward. We got URC coming up on the deck, and we'll get back with these guys probably like late March. It would be a great time. Matt, great job. Yeah. What do you got?
Hey, Gary, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Appreciate you all listening to me blab on for the last hour. Happy to be with you, and maybe this next time we can get somebody from our support team on that Q&A too, and we'll just rock it. We're happy to be working with you all. Thank you.
You know what I'm going to do? I can do one step further. The Q&As are recorded. I've got all of the questions there. I'm going to pull those down, and I'm going to drag JT and Matt back into the conversation over the next 24 hours. I want you guys both looking at these questions. There might be something in there that we didn't grab. That'll be important for these guys, okay? I owe it to them at least. All right, guys, thank you so much. Gary from the Snap One Locals, thank you guys so much. Continue to do well. It is crazy busy out there, but most importantly, let's be safe. And we'll see you guys next time, 2 weeks. Thanks, guys.
Later.